Um, and I'll mute all too. Okay, so welcome to another edition of Torah Study. It is February 26th at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I just want to dedicate Torah Study today to, I'm wearing orange on my tag, my Bring Them Home Now and Halev Shalanu Shavui Ba'aza, our heart is held hostage in Gaza, dog tag. There are some who have suggested to wear orange today in memory of Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas, who were buried today. And if you follow on Times of Israel or whatever other sources that you read your news from Israel from, you can't help but know that thousands of Israelis were lined up on the route of the caravan transporting their bodies from the Chevra Kadisha, like the funeral home, in Rishon LeZion, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv, all the way back to their kibbutz outside of the Gaza Strip for burial. So extremely moving to watch that. Apparently, there were a group of people gathered at the Israel embassy early this morning, in the middle of the night, at 1 o'clock in the morning, because the caravan was at 8 o'clock in the morning Israel time. So 1 o'clock in the morning here on the East Coast, there were people gathered in solidarity at the Israel embassy in D.C. So the caravan proceeded, and people gathered at various intersections along the way, and then the funeral was private, but was live streamed. And so I shared this morning on the Shul listserv President Herzog's very, very moving tribute. I tell you, President Herzog, I shared last year on the high holidays. I don't know who does his writing, but it's really beautiful, and makes you proud to be a Jew and a supporter of Israel to read and to listen to what he has to say. So his eulogy was quite moving, and then you can't help but be moved to tears by the heartbreaking eulogy from Shiri's husband, her widower, and the father of Ariel and Kfir. Just tremendously heartbreaking. So I just want to dedicate Torah study to them and to their memory. And, it's always a wonder to me that no matter what the Torah portion is that week, there's something that has to do with it that connects to what's going on in the world today. So, Baruch, yeah.
Excuse me, when did you send it? Because I don't see it in my feed.
Oh, I sent it to the listserv this morning.
Okay, maybe it hasn't gone out yet.
Yeah, so maybe Ira didn't send it out yet. So
Okay,
I never know. I never
yeah.
know when it goes out, because I never get a
Reply, yeah.
when I send something to the listserv, I never get it when it goes on to the listserv.
Mm.
So anyway, yeah. So maybe I'll text Ira to make sure that it goes out. Let me just do that quickly now. Uh, okay. So, excuse me, those who are, for those of you watching live and those of you watching the recording for that dead air there, just shows how unprofessional I am when it comes to Zoom. Um, I want to take a look at the beginning of this morning's portion, which is Terumah, this week's portion, which is Terumah, page 485 in the Eitz Chaim. Chapter 25 of the book of Exodus, whatever edition of Torah that you're using. And
Okay, I interrupted the prayer when I interrupted you when you were about to do the prayer.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so last week's portion was Mishpatim. It was the civil law code that Moses received from God and taught to the people, and is meant to be understood as part of the portion that came before it, Yitro, in which the people are gathered at Mount Sinai and hear God speak the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments, Mishpatim, go together, those portions, and concludes with Moses and a few others going up Mount Sinai again and seeing God sitting on a throne above a sapphire floor. Okay, so there's a whole mystical experience. So chapters 19 through 24 are really one unit about the experience at Mount Sinai. Okay, now the focus shifts to building the tabernacle. So let's just look at the first few verses. I want to read through verse 9. So, and then look at the commentary on the page, and then also then connect it to the funeral today for Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses, saying, 486, verse 2, Daber el bnei Yisrael, v'yikhu li terumah me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo, tikhu et terumati. Speak to the people of Israel, and take for me a terumah. So I'm not translating it right away. Terumah has a couple of meanings. Here, it's translated here by Eitz Chaim as gift, or in the plural, gifts. The word terumah is singular, so I wouldn't translate it as a plural, gifts, but it's terumah. So terumah comes from the root resh, mem, he, which means to be elevated, something that is elevated, raised up. Like the camp, the overnight camp of the conservative movement is called Ramah, in order for people to have an elevated, fantastic summer. So that's what Ramah means in that context. So terumah is something that's lifted up. So it's a gift, but it's a gift to God. So a gift to God is a gift that is lifted up. Okay, because a gift, like if I were bringing a gift to a birthday party, that gift would be called a matana. So, which comes from the root, which comes from the word, because I don't know what the root is. I'm thinking in my head the three-letter root, and I'm not sure. There's some grammatical thing there, and I'm not sure what the root is. But it's from the verb natan, to give. So matana is a gift. So a matana is a gift from one person to another. Okay? A terumah, or with the accent, the right syllable, a terumah is a gift that is given to God. Now, terumah is also what is set aside from agricultural produce every year to be given to the Kohanim and or to the poor, to the Levite and to the poor in the community. So there's a 7-year cycle. The 7th year is the sabbatical year, and 6 years of the 7-year cycle, Terumah is set aside, and sometimes it's for the Kohen, sometimes it's for the Levite and the poor. Terumah can also be understood, will be understood in that context when we get to the law about it. So that also is a special kind of gift that becomes a spiritual gift. And when it's a spiritual gift or a gift for fulfilling a spiritual purpose or command, then the gift becomes elevated, and therefore it's a terumah. So, take for me a terumah from, okay, so they shall take for me a terumah from every person or every man, but I would translate it every person, who okay, Ira Levine says he just sent it out to the listserv now. So he apologized for the delay. So they should take for me a gift. I'll talk about the verbs here and the grammar in a moment. From every person whose heart so desires, you should take, you plural should take my terumah, my gift. So the verbs here, the grammar is awkward, and my translation is awkward because of how the Hebrew is presented. So, v'yikhu li terumah means literally they should take for me a gift. And that's bizarre because you give a gift. You don't take a gift. So how do you take for me a gift? Or they should take for me a gift from every person whose heart so desires. Who's the they who's doing the taking and then the giving? So that's why the English fixes it. And the English, then you don't understand, if you're only reading the English, you don't get a sense that the Hebrew is awkward. And that's not the point of what I want to talk about today, just that we should know that the Hebrew is awkward. And how is the gift being given? How is the taking being done? And how do the people know that some people want to give and some people don't want to give, right? Because the Hebrew says, from every person whose heart so moves him, right? So there could be some people who don't feel like giving a gift for this particular purpose. Okay, but again, that's not my focus today. It's something to think about in terms of if God wants this to happen, this is a very awkward way of God commanding that people should be giving something to the building of the Mishkan. God should just say, everybody should give something. This is the minimum from what you can afford, but there's no maximum of what to give. And these are the materials, which we're starting with verse 3, that people are supposed to give. So it should be direct in that way. The Hebrew is indirect and awkward, and I don't understand why. But there's some commentary that below the line that you can look at that helps explain that. But you can look at that another time. Verse 3. V'zot ha'terumah asher tikchu me'itam zahav v'chesef unechoshet. So this is the terumah that you should take from them. Like, this is the material I want, God is saying, for this purpose. Gold and silver and copper. Sometimes nechoshet is translated as bronze. Here it's in modern Hebrew it's copper, but and here it's being translated as copper. But there could be some additions of translations of the Torah that could translate it as bronze. So gold, silver, and copper. Utechelet va'argaman v'tolaat shani v'shesh v'izim. And so it's understood that these are textiles because you don't just give blue and purple and crimson. Okay, shani, v'tolaat shani. So the shani is translated as yarn. Shesh is fine linen, and izim are goats, but it's goat skin in this context, okay? So blue dyed, purple dyed, red dyed, yarn, linen, and goat skin. Ve'orot elim me'odamim, ve'orot techashim, va'atzei shitim. And tanned ram skins. Well, I guess it's understood that it's tanned. It's just ram leather and dolphin leather and okay. So orot elim ma'odamim, red dyed ram skin, so or earth colored dyed. So if it's tanned, maybe that's just a natural process of tanning the ram skins. Orot techashim is dolphin skin and acacia wood. How they got the dolphin skin, how they got all this fancy material, because they were just let out of Egypt 3 months before as slaves. So how do slaves have this material? Also, a discussion for another time. Okay, so and if in fact the below the line doesn't even get into the concept of how the people could have had that, and like I said, the dolphin skins, they're in the desert. How are they getting dolphin skins? Yes, Lori.
I have some recollection. Didn't the Egyptians give them things before they
Yes,
left?
they
Yeah,
showered them. Yes, so depending on how we understand it, either the Israelites looted the Egyptians on their way out, or the Egyptians
right.
showered them with gifts on their way out.
Yeah, I was
But
being diplomatic. Yeah.
yeah, but you can understand showering them with jewelry,
Hmm.
right? But throwing leather skins at them is kind of weird.
Hmm.
So how do they get that material? So
Yeah.
that's again a discussion for another time. 6, shemen lamaor, bisamim l'shemen hamishcha, v'liktoret hasamim. Oil for lighting, and spices for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, or for the Ketaret Hasamim is the Ketaret is incense. Samim, in modern Hebrew, samim are drugs. So it's not drugs in the modern sense, like fentanyl or oxycodone, not like that. I mean, in modern Hebrew it is. But sam could be medicinal. It could be a medicinal ointment, like in Talmudic Hebrew. That's what it is. It's kind of a medicinal ointment or a powder. So it's some kind of powder that's used for incense. And so the aromatic, I'm not sure where it's coming from, except because it's incense, like the aromatic in the translation, because it's incense, you expect incense to be aromatic. Now, it's interesting in the Mishnah, just as a side note, there's a Mishnah that tells us the recipe for the incense used in the temple in Jerusalem. And the recipe, some of the things used in the recipe are disgusting, and you can't imagine how disgusting things. I mean, I'm talking about excrement, from both sides of the body, that are mixed in with other items like frankincense and myrrh and stuff like that. All of it mixed together to get to the recipe for the incense. And in Orthodox prayer books, after we sing Ein Keloheinu near the end of the service on Shabbat morning, that recipe is included in the Orthodox prayer book, because the last line of Ein Keloheinu, Atahu shiktiru avotenu lefanecha eketoret hasamim. You're the one before whom we offered incense, and this aromatic incense. And so then, in an Orthodox prayer book, you have included from the Mishnah the recipe for the aromatic incense. Okay, so if we were in an Orthodox synagogue, you can read the English translation. You wonder, why am I reading this at the end of a Shabbat morning service? It's pretty gross. But anyway, that's the whole idea that prayer is a substitute for sacrifice. And so this is a little bit of a remnant of sacrifice that we maintain in the Shabbat morning service. Okay, so these oils and spices, and then 7 avnei shoham, va'avnei miluim, la'ephod velachoshen, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting, for the ephod, and for the breastpiece. 8. So this is all the material. And now verse 8, va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. And you should make for me a sanctuary, a holy place. Literally, mikdash would be a holy place. Same word for kadosh, kiddush, Friday night kiddush, kaddish, all of that from the word, the same word, mikdash. So make for me this holy place, a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. 9, kechol asher ani mar'eh otcha, et tavnit hamishkan, ve'et tavnit kol kelav, ve'chein ta'asu. So make for me a sanctuary, so I shall dwell among them, according to what I'll show you, the structure of the Mishkan, the sanctuary, literally the dwelling place. Mishkan, shin, kaf, nun, means to dwell. In modern Hebrew, they use the Aramaic word mashkanta for a mortgage. So Mishkan, dwelling. So make for me this sanctuary that I dwell among them, according to what I will show you, the structure of the Mishkan and the pattern of the vessels, and so you should do. It's like God is handing Moses, like if you know what architectural designs look like, and I only know that from when this building was built, and I saw all the really long pages, like you need architects need a special printer or engineering offices need a special printer with special paper that is like, I don't know, 3 feet by 6 feet. That almost, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the pages are really big. And you come up with this huge book of these pages for every single aspect of a building that you're building. So imagine God presenting, and we have these in storage here in our building where these specs are. So imagine God giving Moses these kinds of specs. So if you're an engineer and architect, that's what you would naturally be thinking of how God is showing Moses how to build the Mishkan and all the vessels that are in it. So my point today in this is this idea of what this house is, what this holy house is, and what we expect when we're building a house, for the house to, what kind of purpose is the house supposed to serve, and what kind of meaning are we supposed to derive from building such a house. So the commentary on page 485 talks a lot about the purpose of space. So there's sacred time that we talk about in terms of what Judaism is all about. There is sacred time, so praying 3 times a day. Those 3 times become holy when we designate a time to pray. We have special days of the week and days of the year. That becomes sacred time. Shabbat, the 7th day of the week, is sacred every 7th day of the week. And holidays are sacred. So we have sacred time. And then we also have sacred space. So the Mishkan first, later the temple in Jerusalem, and then synagogues today are our sacred space. So it was, when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, that was the only sacred space for the Jewish community, and I'll say for the Israelite community, right? So Israelites, in worshiping God, can do so in the one and only sacred space, which is the Mishkan, or later the temple in Jerusalem. What the rabbis did, transforming Israelite religion to Judaism, is saying that the concept of sacred space can be portable, and that our homes can become sacred space, and our synagogues can be sacred space. So that in Judaism, there's more than one sacred space that we make that is just as holy as sacred time. Okay? So, sacred space, what's the point of sacred space? And so the point of let's say this. Why? The first question is, why does God need sacred space? Like, why is, in other words, what I'm thinking of is, we might understand, or it might make more logical sense that the desire to build a sacred space should come from the people. It shouldn't come from God. In other words, a fitting response to the experience of Mount Sinai, chapters 19 through 24, that comes right before this, a fitting response would be that the people come to Moses and say, yes, we have these laws, but we want to build something to honor God all the time. So it doesn't work that way. The way the Torah describes it is that God is the one commanding the people to have the feeling necessary to want to bring the sacrifices that are going to be talked about in the book of Leviticus, and that to have the Kohanim to become the official officiants and the Leviim on behalf of the people. So that it's one thing we should respond to is that how unusual it is, that it might seem illogical that God is commanding us to have the desire to bring the gift and to build the Mishkan. So it's strange that God is commanding that, and so a way to possibly understand this is that the last time in the, okay, not the last time. There are times in the book of Genesis, and there's even a time in the portion Mishpatim right before this, where people build altars in order to present a sacrifice to God. So we have Cain and Abel bringing offerings to God. We have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob doing so. We have Moses doing so on Mount Sinai after receiving the Torah. So we have those individuals building altars. On behalf of the community, it's God that commands it. So the last time a community wants to build something to God, God comes down and destroys their plan, and that is the Tower of Babel. So in chapter 11 of Genesis, we have what doesn't seem to be like a bad idea, people wanting to try to get close to God, and they build a tower. God comes down, sees it, and causes the people to start speaking different languages to each other, and that foils the plan, and then God disperses the people around the known world at the time. So there's something about the community coming together to build a structure on their own, uncommanded, that God doesn't like. But so therefore God likes this because God is the one commanding it to the people. And so therefore providing the restrictions on how we should understand building a building to God and the material that's going to be used in building it, and the mechanism for which we can make the offers to God. So it seems illogical and contradictory, like from the very nature of verse 2, tell the people of Israel to take for them a gift to me, right? It just seems illogical and contradictory when you want people to bring it on their own, but then you're commanding people to bring this gift. So how is it a gift anymore if it's already commanded? Okay, so the idea then is perhaps God wants to help the people understand this is a way to channel the sense of spirituality and gratitude and understanding of God's existence in this appropriate way. So if you've just had the experience at Mount Sinai, how can you have that experience again? The Torah is asking. You can have that experience again by building the Mishkan and witnessing the daily service that's going to happen there. So that is an attempt in the way that God can channel it for human beings. It's a way for human beings to try to bring back the awesome nature of what Mount Sinai was. And I think the ultimate Mount Sinai experience that we can try to have in the Mishkan or later in the temple in Jerusalem is on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would walk into the Holy of Holies, the one time of year and the only person allowed to do so from the entire community, the entire population of Israel, walking into the Holy of Holies, praying that the Kohen Gadol has undergone the appropriate purification rites in the correct way, and he's offered already the sacrifices to atone for sins on his behalf, his family's behalf, and the people of Israel's behalf. So he's walking into the Holy of Holies in as clean a slate as possible, hoping he comes out alive. And what do the people say when he does? they bowed down, prostrate on the ground, and he says, Yud He Vav He, God's name, in the way that it was supposed to be pronounced. We pronounce it Adonai, but we don't know how Yud He Vav He was supposed to be pronounced. But the Kohen Gadol would say it only then on Yom Kippur. Everybody would lie prostrate when they heard that and respond, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. May God's glorious name be revered forever. So that the Yom Kippur experience of the Kohen Gadol walking into the Holy of Holies and emerging alive, that is the Mount Sinai experience. And everything around that for the rest of the year are secondary to that, but they are other opportunities to have Mount Sinai happen every day. Okay, so that's one aspect of what the Mishkan is that I wanted to say. The other aspect is that it's a house. It's God's house, so that it's not just a vehicle for which we can experience God's presence, but it's also the place in which God's going to live. A place that then, if God's living there, should be protected and have this like extra protection around it because God's living there. And for the Mishkan in the desert, God's presence hovered over the Mishkan the whole time. So people knew that God's presence was there. There was a cloud that hovered over the Mishkan all the time. That's what the end of the book of Exodus tells us, that once the construction of the Mishkan was complete, God's cloud descended and hovered over the Mishkan. So it's God's house. And so as a house, it is the place in which God lives to provide security, that supposedly is supposed to provide security. So now, two things I want to say about that. First is, one can then understand the rabbi's spiritual despair when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. So if that is God's house, and that is the place where God's presence dwells, where the Kohen in the year 69 CE, in the year 70 CE, because it was towards the end of the year 70 CE that the temple was destroyed. So on Rosh Hashanah of 70, Yom Kippur of 70 CE, the Kohen Gadol entered the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies. And then 10 months later, in the month of Av, 11 months later, in the month of Av, that's when, it's almost 11 months to the day. Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei, Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. So 10 months and 29 days after Yom Kippur, God's house is destroyed. So how could that be? How could God let God's own house be destroyed by a Gentile empire? How could idolaters, the Roman Empire, Romans were idolaters, how could idolaters be allowed to destroy the temple, and not only to destroy the temple, but to set up a house of idol worship on the very site? What does that mean spiritually, that God's house was destroyed? What does it mean that God allowed God's house to be destroyed? So you can understand in the moment, if this is how the rabbis understand the temple in Jerusalem, that's how all the people of Israel understand the temple in Jerusalem. If they see that God's house is destroyed, you can understand the trauma and the crisis that instills in the people. So the rabbis had an enormous task to first understand it spiritually, and then to comfort the people in the process of understanding how God's house was destroyed. So they understand it like the Bible understands exile and the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem by the Babylonians, that God wanted God's house to be destroyed in order to punish the people for straying from God's path. And that God is allowing the enemy to destroy God's house to teach the people a lesson, to try to have them learn again what it means to appreciate God's power and God's awesome nature, so that the people can become recommitted to God again. So the people are, the rabbis are suggesting that, and that's how they understand it. And they provide comfort to the people by saying, okay, in the meantime, we're going to be praying for the third temple to be built. 2,000 years later, technically, we're still praying for the third temple to be built. I mean, we pray for that every day, 3 times a day in the Amidah. V'techazena einenu b'shuvacha l'tzion berachamim. May our eyes see, may our eyes see your return to Zion in mercy and compassion. So that is God returning to Zion in the house that will be rebuilt, in the temple that will be rebuilt. So the rabbis say our homes and synagogues are a temporary substitute for God's house, and we can find comfort in God's presence in our house, and we need to devote ourselves once again to be unified, for the entire Jewish community to be unified in worship of God and devotion to God. So that's understanding the sense of what God's house is and what a house is. We understand a house to be a permanent structure, a place of sanctuary and refuge, a place to grow spiritually. This is what God's house is supposed to be, what a synagogue is supposed to be. So this all leads me, as I said at the beginning, I was dedicating today to the memory of Shiri, Ariel, Kfir, Bibas, wearing orange today in their memory, because the 2 boys were redheads. That what does it mean when your home is destroyed? And understanding the trauma and crisis that ensues when your home is destroyed. And so the entire war, the attack of Hamas on October 7th, the killing of 1,200 people that day, the taking of hostage of 250 people that day, is all distilled today into the funeral for Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas. Okay, and that is why I think that today all of Israel mourns for them. All of Israel was watching the caravan from the Chevra Kadisha, the funeral home in Rishon LeZion outside of Tel Aviv, to their final resting place in their kibbutz outside of Gaza. And all of Israel was watching the funeral live a few hours ago, because it represents Yardain Bibas, the widower, his tremendous suffering, which he came right out and said in his eulogy, how am I going to go on without you? You help me make decisions. I don't know how to come out of the dark without you. So all of Israel, that's what Israel has been living with since October 7th. Our home, Israel's home, that is the security of the state of Israel, was almost destroyed. And Israel hasn't experienced something like that since Yom Kippur of 1973, when the Syrian and Egyptian armies broke through and attacked Israel's home, its very survival as a state, as a home for Israel and the Jewish people, was nearly destroyed that day. So it almost happened again on October 7th. So one can understand then the turmoil that we as a people feel, because when the verse says, in verse 8 on 487, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell among you. So it's not just the Mishkan. It's not to be taken literally for that particular Mishkan 3,000 years ago or 3,500 years ago that was built at Mount Sinai. I suggested, actually, there was a conversation in May of 2020 with members of the Rabbinical Assembly. How do we understand Zoom today, and how can we allow Zoom to be a replacement for being able to pray in person, right? Remember the beginning of the pandemic, when it was absolutely dangerous for people to gather together. And how could Zoom be allowed to do this? I suggested this verse as a source for this. Any place that Jews come together for sacred purpose is a time that we are attempting to have God dwell among us. So I suggested that we understand when Zoom is used for that holy purpose, like we still do for evening minyan, that it is a way of bringing God into our midst, and we're fulfilling this verse. So, but it's not just the attempt, like building a home, creating a space, whether it's a virtual space or a physical space. Building a space isn't just an attempt to have a place for an encounter with God. It's an attempt to experience protection from God. That's what I argue. That's what I'm arguing today as to what the purpose of this Mishkan is. It's not just to ask for, to encounter God and experience God, but it's also to ask for God's protection. So the Bibas home, every Jewish home, however Jewish it is, every Jewish home is, like I say to every wedding couple for weddings that I officiate at, right before breaking the glass, there's a midrash that says every Jewish home is a miniature version of the temple in Jerusalem. And when we break the glass at the wedding, yes, we're remembering the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago, but we're also praying that this couple, through their love and their home, can bring the pieces of glass back together again. That's how I end every wedding ceremony, and then the groom breaks the glass, and that's the wedding. So if it's a miniature, if every Jewish home is a miniature version of the temple, then a home is a place that we can encounter God. It's a place for spirituality. It's a place for Jewish values that we learn from the Torah, and it's a place that we feel protected. Okay, I'll just add that element to it too. It's a place that we should feel safe. And so when Israel and the entire Jewish world cries with Yardain Bibas and his family today, it's crying about the idea that the protection wasn't there. And so we're crying out not just for Yardain's loss, his unspeakable loss, but we're crying out together, like, where was God? And then also crying out for comfort. how are we going to bring back God so we feel that protection again? And that I don't have an answer to. I mean, I can say the words that can provide the comfort, but in the moment, like when I was watching for the first time on Times of Israel, or reading, I wasn't watching, I was reading the transcript of Yardane's funeral. I mean, tears were flowing from my eyes because it's just heartbreaking on so many levels, as I'm trying to explain today. And so in the moment, you feel lost and unmoored. But then after a little while, you understand that hopefully, well, Yardane, I think, also said this in his eulogy, the tremendous support that he felt knowing that so many Israelis were on the road there as the caravan of bodies drove by. So there is community that is there to support one another. And we do have some prayers and some psalms that help stabilize us once again and remind us that we as a people have lived through tremendous tragedies throughout our 4,000 years of history. We've been, our homes, all of our homes, our temples, our synagogues have been destroyed over the centuries, and yet we are a resilient people, because the other, one last thing that I'll end with is this, do you have to have a physical space in order to have God dwell among you? Because dwelling among you could also mean dwelling in here. So if you have the personal desire to have spirituality in your life, then you're letting God in to help provide you with a sense of support and inspiration that we need. So, thoughts or comments or questions before we end? So that's my tribute to the Bibas family. May they rest in peace, and may their memories always be a source of blessing and comfort to Yardane and the family and the Jewish people. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.